I have to be honest with you. I have a love-hate relationship with current events. I don't consume or keep up with a lot of news because so much of what happens in the world today is just so negative and soul-sucking. But every once in a while, something really cool happens that captures my attention. And recently, one of those things has been in the news. Did you know that 4 astronauts just returned home from an almost 700,000-mile journey around the moon and back? The Artemis II NASA mission is the first to take astronauts around the moon since 1972. And what's really cool about it is what it represents: a big step back into space exploration. The Artemis II is really an exploratory fact-finding mission. Basically, they did this to test out the rocket's life support systems and to gather data on how the crew responds to spaceflight as NASA plans for the future for space missions, including paving the way for future moon landings and maybe even a long-term human presence on the moon. You'll have to forgive me for nerding out about this, but I think it's incredibly cool. And it makes me think back to a previous NASA mission, Apollo 13. The crew of 3 astronauts was supposed to execute the second moon landing by NASA in 1970, but disaster struck just 2 days into the mission when an oxygen tank on the craft exploded. The crew and mission control, they were forced into this impossible balancing act of making sure the astronauts had enough oxygen to survive while also making sure they had enough power to get their craft home. 4 days after the tank exploded, the astronauts splashed down in the South Pacific Ocean, beating impossible odds to return home safely. Now, the 3 astronauts were honored for their bravery, and deservingly so. But what's sometimes overlooked is that over 400,000 people worked on that mission. In mission control, engineers and scientists, and thousands of other support roles. And it took every one of them to bring those astronauts home safely. What if you were chosen for a mission like that? Something huge, something world-shifting. Well, it's not a what if. You may not be aware of it, but you have been chosen for a mission that could change everything about the world we live in. But the best part is that you haven't been called to accomplish that mission alone. For the next few weeks, we're going to talk about that mission and the fact that we've been sent on it together. Before we dive in, there are a couple things you should know about this series. First, it's going to kind of pick up where we left off at Easter. So if you missed out on our last series, especially the last 2 weeks, I really can't encourage you enough to head to our YouTube channel and catch up. If you really got Easter for the first time this year, or it made a significant change in your life, in this series, we're going to talk about what you should do next. Now, second, the series we start today is the last one of our spring season in PCC students. I know, it's very sad, but we still have a few weeks and a ton of fun left to go. What we always try to do with our last series of the year is give you something you can take with you and go out and do this summer. So I hope you'll really listen and try to apply what we're going to talk about in your own life. Now, with all that out of the way, let's dive in. Out of all the things we're called and instructed to do by Jesus, there may not be a bigger or more important one than what we're focusing on today. I mentioned a minute ago that this series picks up where we left off with Easter. Now, that's the case both because we're going to talk about it as a kind of next step for us after Easter, and because we're picking up the story of Jesus and his followers right after the events of Easter. Now, as you probably know, Jesus dies on the cross. But on the third day after his death, he rises again. He's alive. And now that he's back, he has instructions for his followers. One of the last things he tells them to do before he leaves earth and goes back to heaven. When the disciples saw Jesus, they worshiped him, but some of them doubted. Jesus came and told his disciples, "I have been given all authority in heaven and on earth. Therefore, go and make disciples of all the nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Teach these new disciples to obey all the commands I have given you, and be sure of this, I am with you always, even to the end of the age." Jesus never intended for his teachings to begin and end with him. It's why he chose 12 disciples or followers in the first place, so he could teach them how to love people and share who God is, and then they could go out into the world and do the same. But again, Jesus never intended for his impact to be confined to his brief time on earth. It was always meant to live beyond him. But for the disciples, this meant the dynamic was changing dramatically. For 3 years, they had spent every day with Jesus, traveling with him, witnessing him perform miracles, and watching him teach people about who God is and how they can have a relationship with him. And yeah, Jesus, he taught them and invited them to do those things too. But at the end of the day, Jesus was still there. So all the responsibility didn't really belong to them. But not anymore. He was basically telling them, I'm not going to be around to do it anymore. You have to do it now. Jesus gave his followers a mission that was meant to multiply, grow, and reach far beyond the small group of people it started with. It was a mission meant to bring hope, healing, and love to the world, not just back then, but throughout time, all the way to here and now. But let's back up for just a minute. Did you notice how this entire conversation between Jesus and the disciples started? Let's look at it again. When the disciples saw Jesus, they worshiped him, but some of them doubted. They doubted. Some of the people who knew Jesus the best spent years learning directly from him and saw him come back from the dead. They still had doubts. But right after this comes the mission for the disciples to take the baton from Jesus and continue what he started. He gave that mission to all of them, even the ones who doubted. Now, with such an important mission, you might think that doubts or questions would disqualify some of the disciples. But that wasn't the case. Jesus invited all of them into this mission, and he does the same for all of us too. Now, you might be wondering what this mission actually looks like. Well, if you're at one of our campuses, it's all around you right now. The church is the mission Jesus had in mind. Not a building or a service time or even a student night, but a group of people committed to knowing Jesus better and going out into the world to try to help as many people as possible to do the same thing. Now, Paul, who Elijah taught us about last week, was one of the most influential people in the early church. And he wrote about what it's supposed to look like to be a part of this mission. And so, dear brothers and sisters, I plead with you to give your bodies to God because of all he has done for you. Let them be a living and holy sacrifice, the kind he will find acceptable. This is truly the way to worship him. Now, what you have to keep in mind is that the people Paul was writing to would have been familiar with a religious system based on making sacrifices of things like animals and money and food. These sacrifices were meant to represent a person's commitment to God over everything else in their life. But because of Jesus, we don't have to make sacrifices like that anymore. Instead, we have something much more important to offer to God. It's not animals or money or food. It's us. We can offer our energy, our time, and attention to the mission Jesus gave us. From the time that Jesus walked the earth all the way until today, followers of him all over the world have decided to give their energy, time, and attention to the mission Jesus gave us. And the fact that we're here studying from the Bible is evidence that the mission has been kept alive. So, if you're considering if you're ready to accept this mission, I hope that you'll keep in mind that you're not doing it alone. From his very first group of disciples, all the way to the group you're sitting with as you watch this right now, Jesus sends us on his mission together. Jesus is sending all of us to go and invite others to know and follow him. And we're not alone when we say yes to being a part of it. So if you're ready to accept this mission, how do you do that? Well, first, don't let doubts stop you. Maybe you want to say yes to this mission, but you feel like some of the first disciples did. You have doubts and questions. But like we talked about earlier, your doubts don't disqualify you from the mission. Not only that, but being open about the fact that you have some doubts and questions might help someone else who wants to give Jesus a chance, but has questions too. Bringing your questions into Jesus' mission might actually help you find resolutions to some of your hesitations too. Now, second, you can start small. Going out into the world to make disciples feels like a huge, overwhelming mission, but it's made smaller by the fact that we're all invited to be a part of it. It also means that each of us just has to play our part. And that doesn't have to be some grand gesture. You can start by deciding you're going to be more open or giving of your time and friendships. You can offer some encouragement to someone or be there with someone who's going through a hard time. There are a million things like that you can do to show God's love to people around you. So look for ways to start small this week. And last, you can find your few. Jesus started the entire movement that we now call the church with a small group of 12 disciples. And then he sent them out together so that they could share the weight of this mission and encourage each other along the way. You can do the same thing as you carry out Jesus' mission. So think about who you can surround yourself with so that you can have the same support that Jesus' first disciples offered each other. You know what's most remarkable to me about the Apollo 13 mission? It's the fact that 400,000 people were willing to work around the clock for 4 straight days, all to save the lives of 3 men. And that makes me ask myself, what am I willing to do to make just one disciple? To introduce one more person to Jesus, and then another, and another, and another. That is the mission we're called to. You have a unique opportunity to love and share Jesus' love with the people you know, but you're not alone. We have each other to keep us focused, encouraged, and loved as we accept this mission, because Jesus sends us on his mission together.